I've enjoyed a blissful marriage spanning more than 17 years. However, the story I'm about to share revolves around my first wife's betrayal of my trust. Our journey together began with a 1-year courtship, facilitated by mutual friends who recognized the instant chemistry between us. She was an outgoing, vivacious, and adventurous woman, which made our time together incredibly enjoyable. Her extroverted nature and our passionate connection made me believe I had found my soulmate, and I envisioned a future filled with children and growing old together. We decided to move in together, sharing a cozy apartment with my loyal Alsatian, a faithful companion I had raised from puppyhood. My career in the oil industry often took me out of state and even abroad, leaving my wife, a full-time nurse, to manage her work commitments along with her various hobbies, including attending a local fitness gym. Around the 1-year mark of our marriage, I returned from one of my trips to notice a subtle shift in my wife's demeanor. She seemed less attentive and somewhat distant. When I inquired about the change, she admitted to feeling lonely and missing me during my brief absences, even though my trips typically lasted no more than 5 days. Her supportive circle of female friends often kept her company, and she occasionally went out with them. However, she maintained her commitment to coming home on time and refrained from excessive drinking or late nights. We continued texting during the evenings, and I attributed our diminishing intimacy to the sacrifices we were making for our long-term security and future family, rather than suspecting infidelity or an affair at the time. It was a weekend like any other when I found myself perusing our bedroom desktop computer. For no particular reason, I decided to check the browsing history, and what I discovered was both disturbing and deeply unsettling. Initially, I considered the possibility that these sites might have been a result of malware or those pesky pop-ups that sometimes plague our internet browsing experience. To be safe, I ran a program to clean out any potential viruses or malware, cleared the history and cache, and thought the issue had been resolved. I didn't pay it much mind until a couple of weeks later when I checked the browsing history again, only to find the same unsettling sites. It became evident that my wife had been accessing these sites for some reason. I confronted her about it, and she confessed that she had been visiting certain adult sites out of curiosity but had found them disturbing. I'm not one to deny anyone the right to explore their desires, but the nature and content of these particular sites troubled me, and she agreed wholeheartedly. Until that point, I believed we had a transparent and open relationship, and I had always strived to support her happiness. Over the next couple of weeks, I monitored her online activity, and it seemed as though she had learned her lesson. She appeared happier and more attentive. Then, I received news of an upcoming business trip that would keep me away for a week. Before leaving, I decided to activate the desktop webcam using remote software, thinking it would help maintain our connection. I shared my plans with my wife, and we agreed on set times to chat via video conference, which added an exciting and somewhat naughty element to our separation. I also configured the computer for remote access, a feature I had used in the past to access files, and this software allowed me to control the webcam. During the week, I attempted to check in during my lunch break but received no response. Concerned, as I knew it wasn't a workday for her, I remotely accessed the computer and activated the webcam. To my shock and horror, I witnessed my wife engaged in explicit activities with our Alsatian. I recorded a few minutes of the distressing scene before closing the webcam and software. The shock and disgust I felt cannot be adequately described in words. The last 2 days of my work trip were unbearable. I hurried home and found my wife sitting on the sofa, waiting for my return. I inquired if anything noteworthy had occurred while I was away, to which she replied with a vague denial. I then confronted her with the video evidence. She immediately expressed remorse and shame, admitting that it was a one-time occurrence and that she had just stepped out of the bath, attempting to explain away her actions. Unfortunately, the video left no room for doubt, and her actions spoke for themselves. I couldn't bear to look at her and was overwhelmed with a profound sense of disgust, the same disgust I had felt when I discovered the disturbing websites in her browsing history. I told her that her actions were completely unacceptable, and the betrayal was so deep that it would be best if we separated. She moved in with her parents, and I chose not to share the video with anyone. When our divorce was finalized, I simply told people that we had irreconcilable differences. I lost all contact with her when she moved abroad, and I had to part ways with my loyal dog, which added to the pain of her betrayal. The depth of her betrayal and the abuse of my best friend is something I will never forgive. Okay, let's move to the next intriguing story. 3 days ago, I was diagnosed with a lung cancer. 2 days ago, my wife of 13 years packed her things and kids and left me. I, 40M, have been married to my wife, 42F, for 13 years, and we've been together for a total of 15 years. We have 2 boys, aged 12 and 8, and we've enjoyed a decent life in Eastern Europe, living a middle-class lifestyle. Our love story began in 2008, and our connection was almost instantaneous. We sealed our commitment with a wedding in 2010. When we first met, I was a smoker, although not a heavy one, about half a pack a day. But for the sake of our relationship, I quit smoking because it was a habit she didn't approve of. Fast forward to 3 months ago when I began experiencing coughing fits. Initially, it was just a dry, short cough, resembling the sensation of a dry throat. Over the course of 2 months, my coughing became more intense, and I also started experiencing shortness of breath. I sought medical advice, but the doctor couldn't detect anything concerning and prescribed antihistamines, suspecting allergies as the cause. However, about a month ago, I noticed traces of blood after coughing, and this alarmed me. I consulted the doctor once more, and this time he immediately ordered a chest X-ray. To my dismay, the results revealed that I had cancer, which had already advanced to the second metastasis stage. Throughout this period, my wife downplayed my concerns, dismissing them as paranoia. 3 days ago, I shared the news with her while our children were at school. Initially, she was silent, but she quickly became angry, berating me for putting her through this and suggesting she might not have married me had she known about my cancer. I tried to console her, but she pushed me away, expressing frustration with my cancerous body. Our older son returned from school, sensing the tension. He's still a child, but he grasped that something was amiss. When I approached him for a hug, my wife intervened, claiming that I wasn't in the mood for affection. Regrettably, I went along with her words, allowing her to distance me from our son. When they returned home later than usual, around 9 p.m., nobody touched the dinner I had prepared, and the kids went straight to bed. My attempts to engage with them were met with silence or tears. I began to feel desperate, and I confronted my wife, seeking answers. For the first time in our marriage, she remained distant and cold. She warned me that if I touched her or the kids, she would report me for domestic violence. That night, we slept in separate beds for the first time. The following morning, I had to go to work, and my colleagues and the owner expressed sympathy, inquiring about potential treatments and offering support. I still lacked details about my treatment, but there seemed to be a glimmer of hope. I anxiously checked my phone throughout the day, hoping for a message or call from my wife. I sent messages to my son, expressing my love and a desire to talk later, but he didn't respond. When I returned home, my wife was absent, and it appeared that the kids were at school. However, I noticed that several things were missing, including 4 suitcases, the kids' clothes, toys, and more. I tried calling my wife, but her phone was unreachable, and the same was true for my son's phone. When I called her father, he answered, and his response was threatening, claiming he would harm me if I ever touched his daughter again. He is a retired Army officer. So here I am, sitting in our empty flat, watching my world crumble around me. I have no idea what steps to take next. My sister and her husband are trying to assist me, but my wife appears to have blocked their numbers as well. I miss my children, our Sunday afternoon games, and our leisure time together. My chest aches with emotional pain, and I wish I could rip out my heart to escape this agony. Okay, let's move to the next intriguing story. I found out my fiancé cheated 2 weeks before our wedding. I learned this while at our friend's destination wedding where I can't leave and have to play it cool. My fiancé, 28F, and I, 25F, were just 2 weeks away from our wedding. We've been together for over 6 years, mostly cohabiting, and known each other for 8. It was supposed to be the next natural step in our journey together. Little did I know that my perception of her was about to be shattered. I'm writing this from a hotel during a close friend's destination wedding. The past few days, intended for celebration and joy, have turned into a personal nightmare for me. After the wedding ceremony, my fiancé got heavily intoxicated and fell asleep quickly. Seized by a mixture of curiosity and perhaps a pre-wedding anxiety, I made a choice that I now both regret and appreciate. I decided to snoop through her phone. There was no grand intuition behind it. I wanted to peek at what she might be saying to her friends about me and the upcoming wedding. She had been a bit more guarded with her phone, which stirred my curiosity. It was almost like wishing for the power to read minds. I scanned her messages for any mention of my name, and to my relief, they were positive and affectionate. But then, impulsively, I searched for the word sex to understand if she discussed our intimate life with her friends. What I found shattered my world. I stumbled upon texts with a man from another state, a friend of a friend. They exchanged photos and engaged in sexting. It only got worse as I scrolled further, discovering plans for an in-person meeting for coffee and sex when he visited our city. The evidence was unmistakable, finalized by a selfie of them together that he sent her. She hadn't even bothered to delete any of it. I found refuge in the bathroom, shaking uncontrollably as if trapped in a nightmare. It still feels surreal, as though a part of me refuses to accept the truth. What followed were the most agonizing 36 hours of my life. I couldn't confront her during my friend's celebration without causing a scene. So, I've pretended that everything is normal, although not very convincingly. I had to excuse a couple of bouts of nausea, but I've been maintaining the facade, hugging, kissing, laughing, and saying I love you throughout the wedding festivities. I feel like I'm falling apart. The texts replay in my mind, and I rehearse the conversation I need to have with her the moment we get back home. At one point, I contemplated staying in the relationship, partly to avoid the humiliation of canceling a wedding at the last minute, but I realized that continuing would only set me up for failure. Looking back, there were numerous red flags, particularly the suspicious timeline of when she ended her last relationship before starting ours. She swears it ended before we began dating. But her ex had a conflicting story, one I dismissed when my fiancé labeled her as irrational. However, I suspect my fiancé might be a serial cheater. The challenging part is that we work together in the same small company and just bought a house. Untangling this mess will be an uphill battle. Interesting update. The tumultuous saga of my life has taken on the aura of a dramatic movie, one where nothing unfolds as expected. Our journey back home began on a Sunday morning, along with the newlyweds, and we made a stop for brunch with the bride's family. By this point, my fiancée had sensed that something was amiss, and her anxiety about my distant demeanor was mounting. The eruption occurred when, in a thoughtless moment, I left my phone on the table while we were waiting for our food. My fiancée decided to access my phone for some reason, likely not with any nefarious intent. Perhaps she just wanted to take some lighthearted pictures with the groom. As I mentioned before, I had changed my phone's password to protect the incriminating evidence I had discovered earlier. She did not take kindly to that. Not at all. She immediately spiraled into a panic attack when I refused to reveal why I had changed my password. She said things like, "You've been acting weird and you never change your password." There was even the surreal, "Are you talking to someone?" All of this unfolded right in front of the groom. Desperately, I tried to downplay it by attributing the password change to the need for secrecy around Christmas present ideas, a tradition we usually maintained, but she wasn't buying it. In the midst of our friends and family, she began texting me, imploring me to talk to her immediately. Her texts soon gave way to tears. I figured that things couldn't get any more awkward, so I signaled her to come outside. She tearfully asked, "Did I do something wrong?" Reddit. When I finally said, "I know what you did. I know about his name," it was an indescribable moment of relief. Part of me was elated despite the circumstances, as I was no longer carrying the burden of concealing this knowledge. It felt like extracting a festering splinter. Initially, she acted bewildered, but that quickly turned into "he's just a friend." Then we didn't do anything, and we only kissed and texted. She refused to acknowledge it as cheating. Even now, she denies any sexual contact beyond kissing. Throughout her explanations, she kept begging me to stay and proceed with the wedding. She didn't even say "I'm sorry" until I pointed out the absence of an apology amid her excuses. I felt like I was dealing with a complete stranger. "You might not believe this, but some of your words were echoing in my head as she spoke." I held firm in my decision to separate and cancel the wedding. Finally, I coaxed her back into the restaurant, warning her that we'd make a scene if we didn't return to our friends. I'm not proud of using that phrasing, but she was refusing to leave the parking lot. I quickly consumed my cold brunch while she stared at hers, stunned. By this point, it was glaringly obvious to everyone around us that something was terribly wrong. I repeatedly reassured our friends that they had done nothing wrong, saying, "I'll explain more later, but let's just head home for now." I didn't want to reveal the truth at that moment and have us all endure a long car ride with the weight of that knowledge hanging in the air. In an incredible twist of fate, I spent the 10-hour car ride singing and making conversation, while she was on the brink of tears and dry heaving into a sick bag, trying to act normal for our friends. I must have seemed like a psychopath, as I was lighthearted from finally unburdening myself. The groom, bless his heart, tried to discuss our wedding plans multiple times, and I deftly changed the subject with jokes or anecdotes from their wedding. On a side note, did you know that 99% of road trip songs are about romance and breakups? We listened to Adele's Hello from the Other Side twice, with one rendition passionately belted by the bride and the other by the groom. It felt like I was trapped in a cliché nightmare. We reached home, and the drama was only beginning. I texted the couple to apologize for our strange behavior and explain the situation about the cheating and the canceled wedding. They responded with messages of support and understanding. The details are already getting hazy, but I essentially reiterated, without ambiguity, that we were no longer together, the wedding was canceled, she would be sleeping on the couch, and I expected her to move out. She became completely hysterical, trailing me around the house, attempting to hug me, and repeating phrases such as "we can fight for this together" and "I love you, say it back." Sadly, things took a very dark turn. She constantly threatened self-harm, expressing her desire to die. In addition to the usual kitchen knives, I also have an extensive collection of knives and several firearms. I asked her bluntly several times if she intended to hurt herself, to which she responded with, "I can do what I want and you don't care anyway." She watched me clear my firearms to prevent her from using them and said, "You don't think I'll find another way?" For a moment, I let her out of my sight, and she went to my knife collection drawer, retrieving a small folding pocket knife that I had gifted her years ago. She was crying out that it was hers and that I couldn't take it away, as she could do as she pleased with it. I tried to wrest the knife from her, and she refused to let go. I gave her an ultimatum: surrender the knife or I'll call the police. She defied me, so I carried out my threat and used Siri to dial 911. The instant I dialed 911, her demeanor changed dramatically. We have a friend who had been Baker acted in the past, and my fiancé was terrified by their experiences. She immediately relinquished the knife, apologized, and calmly sat on the couch. She claimed that she had lost control in the moment but had regained her composure. To her credit, she was in the midst of a panic attack. The police officers were incredibly understanding and professional. They decided not to Baker act her since she was now calm and stated that she had no intention of harming herself. I actually agree with this decision, seeing the police seem to ground her back to reality. How do you like these stories? Write your opinion in the comments. Let's get 1,000 subscribers. I really need it.